Hi again, this is Hilda K. Broady, and thank you for choosing In My Shoes. Today we also have an exciting program. I have two wonderful guests, Mr. Grant Valentine and Mr. Dan Gonzalez, and we're going to step into their shoes for today, and they're going to give us some insight on various topics dealing with reentry and services throughout the city. So first we can go to Mr. Valentine, and you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be here?
Sure, Hilda, and please call me Grant.
All right,
Mr. Valentine, that was my father's name.
All right.
And first, let me just say to you, thank you for your show, and thank you for bringing this important dialogue, discussion, information to the communities here throughout New York City and in particular the Bronx. Because we all know that without timely information and education, people in our community become victims. So this is a very, very important show that you're doing. I've been with the Division of Parole for over 30 years. And during that time, I've worked in reentry. I've trained a number of parole officers in public safety, case law, agency policy. And I've also ascended to the ranks of Assistant Deputy Director of Program Services, which means I ran all the programs in the state of New York. Drug programs, housing programs, employment programs. I oversaw all those programs. And for 2 years, I was Director of Strategic Planning, which means I kind of coordinated the progressiveness of the agency moving forward to a more technological aspect of monitoring parolees. So I've had a very storied career. I was the first African American that was trained as a master instructor for the agency. I was the first African American to be trained as a chemical munition instructor, and actually the first in the agency as a chemical munition instructor. I was the first African American to be trained as a advanced tactics instructor. And I also was the first African American in the agency to actually run the transition program for the agency from New York City. So I've had a very storied career. I retired now, and so now I'm finding other things to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But now let me just, and I guess Danny Gonzalez, it's your turn.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Of course, I don't have a long history as he does, but nevertheless, I'm now senior advisor to a few community-based organizations and in the city of New York, and which are national and international based, Strive being one of them, which is an international organization that deals workforce training, headquartered out of East Harlem, and in about 30 other states, affiliates throughout the country, and including in the state of Israel, 3 cities in Haifa and Jerusalem, and in England and Ireland, a few others. I stand to be somewhat of a person in community affairs and dealing with the logistics of getting money and finding money for these organizations, and Strive again with their international footprint all over the country, dealing with workforce and unemployment and reentry throughout the international spectrum. I'm also a senior advisor over at SCHOLAS, which has a national footprint throughout the country, dealing with the reentry program, and well, not reentry, but more importantly, technology-based training, A+ and technology, and now getting together and putting their UDC together, an Urban Development Corporation, with private corporations throughout the country, in trying to bring jobs back to the United States that were offshore. There are a few exciting things happening in that arena we'll get more into as we start moving forward with this. But thank you for having me here.
We appreciate you coming. And recent topics have been basically different aspects of reentry. We've had people who have been incarcerated. We've had people who have worked in the chaplaincy, who are working in reentry programs, who are doing different aspects, housing, because this show is not going to be a soundbite. We're going to do in-depth. We're really looking for solutions. Our people are in dire straits. They really are. And I've been aware of it for quite a while. And I've just been looking around for, well, how can we come up with a solution? Because we could sit back and be at a pity party and, oh, those poor people, and and that does nothing to help that doesn't make them feel any better, that we understand that they're in dire straits, and we really have to go dive in and do something. And I too am retired.
Good, good.
So,
Congratulations to you
I'm
too.
a state employee who's retired, and I just find that retirement is just going to help us to do what we want to do, and when we want to, and how we want to, and we don't have an overseer.
I think when you're retired, people think you're just sitting around watching TV all day. But I've found a lesson learned from me is that I don't want to tell anybody else I'm retired. I've been asked I've been now a trustee on my village board. I'm also asked to be executive director of a program called CJIS. I'm also on the youth board in Rockland County. I'm very active in my church, and they're asking me to do more and more each day, and so I certainly think that when you do become retired, you now can dedicate yourself to doing more community services, things that you really can make a change. I can remember one of my bosses, Mary Ellen Flynn. She was a great lady, and she said to me, "Grant, you're a very talented person, but you have to begin to think about what your legacy will be. How will you make a difference in the world you live in?" And that always stayed with me, and I think it's one of the driving forces behind me about what I can do to make a difference in this world that we live in, not only for me, but for my grandchildren, children coming behind me, because we have to make this world a better place for them.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that when you think about the reentry population and the people who are affected and infected by what takes place, I think we have to go back at the beginning and think about, what do we mean by punishment? What do we mean by the criminal justice system who levies through the court system's punishment? Is it actually punishment? Or are we in an archaic situation back in the 18th and 15th century, eye for eye, beheading? What are we actually doing to make a difference? Because when you look at the data and you see people who are always returning back to prison, are we really punishing them? Are we really making them unhappy? Or is it a new social order that they are developing in there? Because when you're incarcerated, you don't have to worry about a job. You don't have to worry about housing. You don't have to worry about medical care. You may be unhappy for a short period of time, but you create new social order, new friends while you're in there. So when you look at the number of people who are reoffending and going back in the criminal justice system, who are we actually punishing? Are we actually doing something that says to the public that we're doing something and makes us feel good about that? Are we hiding people? Because we're not really changing behavior. We're not really changing what's taking place. And certainly when you look at the criminal justice system that's made up of 88% of the folks in there are people of color. Are we talking about power and control? Or what are we actually talking about when we talk about punishment? And I think we have to begin looking at that aspect of the criminal justice system first, in terms of punishment, and then begin to move out into how we begin to correct behavior. Certainly, I think a lot of agencies, corrections, supposed to correct, parole doesn't have the resources to do the things it need to do. So what are we actually doing with that piece of it? And then how do we measure punishment? How do we measure it?
I wasn't sure. I mean, when we were coming up, I thought that the prisons were supposed to be sites for rehabilitation, not so much punishment, but to do things to change behaviors. And then I saw this movie, The Birdman of Alcatraz, and he said that rehabilitation was to invest again with dignity, and I was saying, well, when do we get to that phase of what's going on? Because they are coming in and going back, coming in and going back, and is it because they're not equipped to deal with outside life other than being confined? Or
well, you look at punishment, and punishment says what? We're going to make you unhappy because you've done something in society and you deserve this. Or we're going to put you in place in terms of power control because you've done something that society doesn't agree with. So we're going to punish you and give you 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be, incarceration. And that's going to make you unhappy. It's going to make you feel pain. But is that actually happening? Is that person who's going through the criminal justice system, and I mean through the courts actually, who's levying, and it all starts with the legislators who make the laws, who's supposed to be making these laws that are supposed to protect us and supposed to punish people who they feel have done something wrong against society. I mean, they used to behead you or stone you, right? That's how they punished you before. You felt pain, but now they put you in correctional facilities for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the case may be, and they're supposed to make you feel pain and be unhappy. But is that actually happening?
Well, I find that the corrections department, that whole word rehabilitation doesn't exist. And when you talk to some correctional professionals, they say the same thing. What you do have is it's like when somebody gets arrested, they go to jail. It's like taking them from the street into another urban environment, and the hanging out starts all over again. There was a time,
It's a new social order. Right.
You'll find that there was a time where they weren't mandated to go to school. They would just sit around. You give them the opportunity. Okay, you either go to school or you can go hang out in the yard. Well, of course they're going to go hang out in the yard. And of course they're going to congregate like they used to congregate in the streets. So as time moved forward with corrections, they started to mandate and realize, wait a minute, what are we doing with our education people? They're sitting around and, maybe 1 or 2 people in the class. Now they mandated that they have to have a diploma, they have to go to school, they have to be in class. Well, at least the federal government, what they do is they make sure that you have to have a diploma before you discharge. So all those kids that don't have to be in school. And they have colleges that come in and everything. There was a time when the state of New York did the same thing, but unfortunately because of the politics of the state of New York, which took away those courses away, you only have maybe 1 or 2 college courses throughout the state of New York, one of them being very successful but very small, Hudson Link, which started in Sing Sing. And I got to give Brian Fisher his props, who helped put that together and started moving it forward, and saw that education is a tool to keeping people from recidivism. And Hudson Linkage, they graduate about maybe 40 or 50 a year, I think, but that's not enough. And none of those guys come back. You'll find that when you have a college degree and they've put in a lot of education work, and they've learned expand their mind and everything. I have a son that's in jail. I mean, he's in Sing Sing. I'm hoping he steps into the Hudson Linkage program. But at the end of the day, all these other guys that are doing nothing with themselves, if there were more college programs in our facilities, in our state-run facilities, even at the juvenile justice level, more programmatic college or getting ready to work, because a lot of our kids, unfortunately, don't want to go to school. They want to go right into work. So, but you swing back over to the juvenile justice part of it, kids that are coming out of our secure facilities don't have the tools to, I mean, they're locked up at 14, 15 years old. They're 18 now when they go out. What do they do next? If they don't got a diploma, which some of them leave without diplomas, they're clueless of what to do next because they went in when they were kids.
So are they incapable of getting a diploma, or?
Oh, they can. See, I wouldn't know exactly why a kid doesn't want to go all the way through school, or I don't know what his mental capacity is. I don't know what his emotional situation is. But whatever it is, if you're in the custody of the state of New York, they have all these professionals and all these wraparound services inside there. Where are they? Where are they?
So there's no vocational training either. So
not that I'm aware of. I know that in the state system, the adult system, there is some vocational training going on in there. Sing Sing being the best example of what happens on the academic side and the vocational side. But I can't talk for the other prison system, the other institutions that are up there. But I can tell you the juvenile justice system, I don't think there's a lot of vocational or any kind of training going on in their system, other than housing them and warehousing these kids, and there's some schooling, maybe some schooling going on, but not enough to prepare them for release. So when they're out there, they have to sort of like depend on their aftercare worker, who's sometimes a social worker or a youth counselor or something like that. But they're sort of like in the model of probation, keeping an eye on them. And if they can send them to a programmatic nonprofit organization like Strive and other organizations that are out there, they probably would, if they could.
So Strive provides the training, or just job readiness or?
No, they do the attitudinal training, the job readiness, and they do we do the hard skills with them. So there's a lot going on with Strive when it comes to, and they don't, they have a lot of different programs when it comes to kids going in there. We get, our juvenile justice population. They do, right now they're doing something with Con Ed. There's agreements between Con Ed and us, and they get jobs immediately after we create a curriculum for them, and then they move forward.
I think it's important what Danny's saying, because if you look at the criminal justice system and how it's constructed, it's not an isolated system. Corrections is what you might call a closed system, where they have their own, actually have correction law that governs what they do and how they do things. It has their own closed system. Unlike, say, parole doesn't have its own law. Education has its own law, education law, which governs how you operate in the laws and guide that. But the community supervision piece is something that's a combination of multiple agencies, programs, C.B.Os, supposedly working collaboratively together to work with this population with no money. And that's how it actually works.
So there's no, you're saying there's no funds allocated for the program?
Well, as Danny mentioned earlier, you have an educational program that services about 50 to 100 adults, and you have a correction system that has over 50,000 people in it.
So, and that's not including
Dropping the
Bedford
bottom.
Hills?
So
Well, they recently moved into Bedford Hills. They're in Bedford Hills. They're in Fishkill.
Sing Sing.
They're in Sing Sing. They're in about 5 now, but that's it. I mean, there was a move by the governor to get more colleges into the correctional system, but because of the other side of the aisle, everybody coddling inmates, that whole thing, they throw it up in the air, and
So-
this wasn't the right time at this point.
Governor Cuomo?
Our Governor Cuomo. Yeah, he did. He had the will to do it, and he wanted to do it.
So
But
we need
he had to
get-
pull back because of the political climate right now. It would have never passed the Senate.
And education is a very key piece of it. I mean, if you look at all the data says that if a person is graduating college, his likelihood of re-offending is reduced to about 1.0%,
Yeah,
1.2%.
I mean, the
So
recidivism.
it's really, you talk about a public safety issue. But if you look at the profile of an individual who's going through parole and corrections, ideally, the person's usually African-American Latino. They usually have a 3rd or 4th grade reading level. They usually dropped out of 8th or 9th grade, they dropped out. Some sort of substance abuse history is involved there. And if you look at the number of releasees throughout the country in 2005, let's look at the data here. You had 24,000 releasees in New York State just in year in the year 2005, 24,000. And that's just releasees coming out. That was third. New York State was third behind California and Texas. And 89% of those released were Latino and Black. And the ages between 24 and 29, 30% of them were reincarcerated within 6 months. 30% of that number.
Within 6 months?
Within 6 months. Within 5 years, 80% of them were reincarcerated. Those are astounding numbers. And if you look at the number, if you look at that grouping, that cohort that says that you have 88% males who are incarcerated, 83% being African American Latino, 49% of that 83% are between the ages of 24 and 29. Those are astounding numbers.
That's frightening.
It's astounding numbers. So when Danny talks about education, certainly that is the key to it. And you have to think about what's the cause and effect of that, what's happening in our public schools that are turning our Latino and Black men towards criminal justice.
Well, the police are in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the police are in the schools now. Like, I think when we were growing up, we never saw a police person in the school. Mm-hmm. But now, I mean, there's one school, Erasmus Hall, they go into the school and it's almost like they're going into an airport. Mm-hmm. They're not evaluating our kids properly. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if a kid has a learning disability and they're struggling, first grade is supposed to be the fun grade, kindergarten is supposed to be, but by the time they get to the 3rd grade, if they haven't really addressed that issue, you're losing the kids because now they're going to do other things. They're not going to just sit back quietly and okie doke. Kids don't do that.
Well-
So you're losing them there because they're not learning. And the system is not set up to work with the kids properly. Okay, and I work with the people who aged out of high school, but who could barely, was almost illiterate. And some of them were learning disabled. They had learning disabilities. And I have difficulty with people who have learning disabilities and live in the Bronx.
Right.
Because we have the only center for the treatment of learning disabilities in the city. And it's in the Bronx. And these kids were not referred there, where they have 5 students to 1 person, and they actually sit down with that kid and figure out exactly how they learn. Because they are not developmentally disabled, they learn differently. So they shouldn't really be calling it disabilities. They should be different. They learn differently. They learn more. Some of them learn more from sight, from touching, or from some, just saying it doesn't mean anything. I had a client who, she went to school in Harlem first, then she moved to the Bronx. She moved to the Bronx, Co-op City, and she had a learning disability to begin with. In Harlem, they printed everything. Everything was printed. She was in the 1st grade and she was still printing. She comes to Co-op City and they're writing everything in script. And she's going on, what is that? Okay, and she fell further and further and further and further. There was no way she was going to graduate.
Well, see, this is why I'm currently the chairman of the board of a charter school in Rockland County, and this is where I see the value in charter schools, because you begin to identify particular learning styles and learning abilities of individuals. Unfortunately, what happens in public schools sometimes, it's not taken into account the holistic issue of a child, the parent, the community, environment that a child's coming from. I give you an example. A child who comes from the projects, whose survival means I have to act and behave a certain way to survive. You know, that means I have to take on this demeanor. Now, how do I transpose that demeanor to the classroom? Well, I can't. As a child, I can't do that. So now I'm classified as what? Special ed or disruptive or learning disabled, or I'm classified as hyperactive. Not taking into account that the environment that this child's coming from, whether it be the projects, whether it be East Harlem, South Bronx, Bedford-Stuyvesant, those communities, what that child has to do to survive in those communities. You and I as adults can use what's called a management process that allows us to put on different faces in different situations and assimilate into that situation and be successful. You're asking children to do that, and they can't do that.
They have to be taught how to do that because we did it. We did it. I'm from Bed-Stuy. All right. And when I went into Crown Heights, when we moved from Bed-Stuy to Crown Heights, I became stupid. Even though I could read and write when I was before I even started school, I could read, write, I could do fractions, I could do decimals, I could do it all. But by the time I moved from PS 42 on Clawson Avenue in Brooklyn to PS 91 on Albany Avenue in Crown Heights, I was 2 grades behind. I couldn't understand how I got stupid. And it was the education system. And I was in 5-1 when I was in Bed-Stuy. When I moved to Crown Heights, they put me in 6-2. I thought I was going to die because I was stupid.
But you're talking about teachers understanding the students, how it works both ways. And if I'm a teacher who's not familiar with your background, your culture, your understanding, I'm not going to understand how you're behaving, how you're reacting. I'm not going to understand it. It's going to be a square peg in a round hole. So I'm going to now say to you, you're learning disabled, or I'm going to say, you're hyperactive, or you need to go in special ed.
So when they have these parent-teacher conferences, I kind of noticed that they don't bring in technology.
Well, I think, again, going back to public schools, those parent-teacher conferences are more about bake sales, cookie sales, or those kind of things. I think in charter schools, it's more substantive. The parents who are English language learners are getting information on immigration. They're getting information on how to vote. They're getting some real life issues to help them. They're getting mentors, not only to their family, but to the children. I think that makes a big difference.
So how do we translate that into the public schools? Because, I mean, the majority of the kids are not in the charter schools. They're in the public schools, and we can't wait any longer. We can't wait for it to happen. We need to make it happen, and we need to make it happen yesterday.
And I can answer your question. The Edmund and Susan Gordon Charter School, which I'm the chairman of the board of, one of the things that we're going to do is the charter school is actually a laboratory. It's actually a place where you can look at things and design them to transpose them into the public schools. So the successes that you have, the successes you do and make in those charter schools are supposed to ideally go to that public school district, so that the public school district can utilize those success stories, those best practice models, those evidence-based things that work. And so when you talk about a charter school that has a small number of children, that's so you can use those experimental things to see what works. To see how you can connect mentors with those students. Because if Grant Valentine is going back to Johnson Projects and I've got my books in my hand, I'll become a target to those predators in that community. But if Grant Valentine is working in a community with Danny Gonzalez as my mentor, then they're not going to mess with me because they know Danny Gonzalez is not going to let anything happen to me. So I feel very secure about doing my science, about doing my math, and doing the things that are necessary. Because I know Danny Gonzalez got my back. And I know Danny Gonzalez knows me. So you want to have a mentor for that family. You want to have a mentor to that family also if it's a family that's a bilingual family. You want to have someone who can relate them and talk to them in their language, in their culture, and identify with them what you need to do to transition, to make those kind of movements. Public schools don't have that. They don't have the time. They don't have the numbers to do that. And so that's why you can do these things in a charter school to help these families, because you can't just deal with the child by himself. You have to deal with the holistic, not only the child, but the family, the environment. All of that encompasses the child. I grew up in the projects, in Johnson Projects. And so growing up in Johnson Projects in East Harlem, there were people there that helped me get through this process. I tell people all the time, I'm not here because I'm the best and the brightest. There's people who I stood on my shoulders who lifted me up when I fell and helped me get to where I am. When I went back to law school in 2005, it was people who said, Grant, you got to go. And that's what I did. But it's people, you need people helping people. That's what it's about. We all have a story to tell. When we tell that story, it's so that other people can learn from that story and can repair their lives and move forward. And that's what we got to do with our public school system. And that's what we're doing in Rockland County. I think there's some charter schools here in New York City that are moving forward. And we want to be progressive with that. We want to share those success stories. We want to share what works with the public school, with the general public, so that they can help move these children away from the criminal justice system into being success stories. That's what we want to do.
So the question remains at this point is, how do we get our kids who are between the ages of 13 to 20, keep them out of the criminal justice system? Because that seems to be the number that keeps popping.
Because
in
by
and
the
out.
time they're 8, 7, 8, they've given up. Mm-hmm. Then this is just 8 to 14 is just wasteland time, and there's nothing in place to rein them in, to help them out. I do a little bit of that with my bowling program, because bowling is just the hook. It's an intergenerational program, and that wasn't by accident. That was, the youngest is 4, the oldest is 79, and they have the whole community at their disposal. So the senior citizens are imparting wisdom. The professionals that bowl, because everybody that bowls is basically a working person, it's introducing them to various occupations, from porter maintenance people to teachers, architects, and they're exposed to that. And then they have to learn, like where we bowl it's the only non-automated bowling center left in the city. So they have to actually do the math. They actually have to keep their score. There's no machine doing it for them. They have to actually learn angles. So we're teaching them without them knowing that they're teaching. They're being taught. They're being taught the skill of bowling, but they're really being taught life skills as well.
It's mentoring. What you're talking about is actually mentoring.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the key pieces of what we have to do. I think so often we as professionals in communities of color, when we've quote unquote made it, when we made it,
We forget.
we move out.
We move out and
We move
forget.
out.
I stayed.
And well, some of us do stay, you know, but others move out. We go to the suburbs. We got a nice house in the suburbs, our 2 cars, and we have our families, and we become isolated. You know, people, you become a bedroom community.
Well, it's the same thing with athletes and rappers and everything. They start in our community and then they leave. And, you know, these are the kids of the next generation behind them are looking for mentors, and they're gone.
It's like Martin Luther King said, the urgency of now. And we have to understand that, that we can't wait for tomorrow. The urgency is now. You know, we have to begin to impact these communities now. We have to begin to show our children that there's a way to move up. There's a ladder to success.
Exactly.
You know, and not a ladder towards drugs, not a ladder towards towards crime or prostitution or any of these things, towards gangs. There's a ladder towards success, and that ladder towards success has to start with mentors like yourself, like Danny, like yourself,
Which is
being back in the community and showing them that, hey, you don't have to be a drug dealer to be successful.
exactly.
You don't have to put a ball in a hoop to be successful. You don't have to play football to be successful. You could be successful on Wall Street. You could be successful in corporate America. You could be successful being a teacher. You could be successful being a parole officer, a correctional officer. You could be successful doing these things. You know, you don't have to do the negative things to be there.
But they have to be exposed
Absolutely. That's
to
correct.
it. And that's why we have a 99.99999. We've had one kid, I've been coaching since 1988, and I've only had one kid drop out of high school, and I've only had one kid get arrested.
See, that's
And-
where
and
that's
we
where
reined
these
him back
programs
in.
and mentors come in. You know, mentors. When you look at it, these kids have nobody out. That's why they attracted to gangs, and
That's
they
right.
start
That's
adopting
correct.
them as their family.
That's right.
And they
That's
start
right.
to look up to their leadership in that gang to help hold them down. You know, to keep them out of problems
And to protect them.
To protect
them.
to hold them down, and keep them out of problems and everything. And we have to kind of like stop right there. You know, there are people that came out of your community, have done very well, and they need to match them up with these kids and show them
Sure.
there's another side to this.
But where do you do that? Because, okay, there's no more after school. Okay, I've been actually driving around looking recently, and the elementary school in my neighborhood, where there used to be a schoolyard, there's another building. So there's no place for them to actively get off some of the energy that they have. There's very few places for them to be, and they can't be on the corner.
Well, I can tell you, the Edward and Susan Gordon Charter School, they've identified like sororities, deltas, kappas, omegas, masons to be mentors. These are African American professionals who have, quote unquote, been successful, and they're soliciting them to come back into the schools to identify themselves with a particular child. This is the person you're going to be with for the whole time you're there. This is the person you'll be with, and their families.
Well, in New York City, we have DYCD, the Cornerstone program. A lot of our nicer houses had community programs in their developments, but they were underutilized. And what they did is they turned them over to DYCD on the Bloomberg, and hence DYCD, Division of Youth and Community Development, started to contract community-based organizations to run those after-school centers and run those beacon programs and other things that they were doing out there. Because I know Louis Osorio was the head of that. He was the first. He had the Patanzas houses, and he was running one of those Cornerstone programs, and they eventually made him the head of it, and he reduplicated it throughout the city. But then all of a sudden they started to scale back, losing funding on it. And I mean, they're always the first sacrificial lamb of these programs. Before anything else in the large scale of things in city government that go first, always youth programs and community-based organization funding. They always, I mean, my hat's off to this new Speaker of the City Council, Melissa Mark-Riverito, and again, going back to SCHOLAS with that funding, and which is going to be unique in itself in pairing up sort of like corporate America with the C.B.Os and developing curriculum where they know where they need those, they need that people assets to come in and train them for those jobs. Those jobs are right there waiting for them. All they got to do is be trained. It's the same thing with kids. Kids, when you have them in school, I mean, out of school, they have nothing to do and they're looking for something to do. They want to do something.
Yes, they do.
They want to stay active. They want to stay out of trouble, but that's all that's around them. And if there's nobody there to guide them from this way to that, where their families are working or whatever the case may be, they may have issues at home or something like that, then all of a sudden those kids are going to get involved in other arenas.
Which is why we trained our youth to be coaches, because there was no summer youth employment either.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, I have them from September to June. School is out and we're out. Everybody's going at the same time. So I said, wait a minute. And I kept saying, well, apply for summer youth employment. You'll get a job and then you'll be fine for the summer, and then I'll see you in September. And I realized that none of them were getting the job, so we paid for their training. Mm-hmm. I took out pension loans. I was serious. My kids were not going to go to jail. And so now a different approach has the largest number of certified bronze level Olympic coaches in one program in the world. And they are coaching, and they're not coaching other children, they're coaching adults. Okay, so they have some place to be where I know that they're safe, they're getting paid, so I know that they're not knocking anybody in their heads, and they're coming on Saturdays, they're coming back on Saturday mornings to work with the younger children to let them know. Hilda doesn't bowl, Kathy bowls. My Hilda Kathy Broady, my middle name is Kathy. Miss Kathy threatened us when we were younger, and I did. If you don't graduate from high school, I'm going to make your life a living hell.
I think one of the things Danny mentioned too about how do we impact these children at that young age? What do we do to get them to see the light?
They have to see that the person is going to be there. If the person says they're going to be there, they really have to be there.
I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that they have to understand their history and their culture, who they are. Because most young people don't know who they are, where they came from. They don't know their Latino background. They don't know their African American background. They don't know that. They don't know if they understood more about who they were and what people went through. I think they'd be better served to say, let's see what I can do to make it a little bit different. So we have to teach our children their culture, and we don't do that.
We didn't get ours. I mean,
right.
I didn't get that culture stuff until I got to college. There was no black studies back then.
There's no Latino
Harriet
studies
Tubman
either.
and Frederick Douglass, and
but
that was it.
But it does not excuse us from teaching our children now about who they are and who we are as a people, and give ourselves a sense of pride and connectivity, that we're all in this together, and we all got to move this, we all got to turn this battleship together, and move this thing together, and we can't be, as some people say, fragmented out there, whether you be Haitian, Jamaican, African American from the South, from the North, or you be Latino, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, we're all in this together.
Right.
We're all in this together.
So we need to take a different approach to service in the world.
And for those people who want to fragment us or divide and conquer us, if we play into that, shame on us. Because we're all in this together. Everything came out of Africa. It depends on where your ship stopped at. That's what it came down to.
Okay. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. And that's why I kept saying we're taking a different approach. We're doing things differently, a different approach to service in the world. Because think of it, the young people could be our world leaders. And then my whole other thing was I need them to be paying FICA and not bail. Because Social Security is what's going to help us out here. And if they're not paying, if they're not working, they're not paying FICA. And Social Security is dying because 88% of our people are incarcerated. They're going up there, and then what are they doing there but nothing? And
education is an engine of opportunity.
There are so many opportunities in education, and our kids don't.
Well, actually, for a while in the prison system, our people were actually contributing to the quality of life of those communities that those prisons were in, because they were using our people as censors and everything, get more money and everything. They were counting us as people living up there.
That's right. Well, they still do. Still do. Right. The census.
I thought that they had changed.
I thought they changed it.
They were working on it. I don't know if it's been changed.
Yeah, I think it's been changed.
I remember the Bronx Clergy Legislative Round Table, and that was supposed to have been changed in 2012.
Right. The federal government?
It was supposed to have been changed in 2012.
They can't use our people anymore. They got to count us from the city they come from.
We're counting our people that are up there here.
Here, right.
That's where it should be.
Well, yes, that's they come in here.
Because that's
Right.
where the federal funds are being allocated based on population. You know, so it should be that way.
No,
So
I
that
mean,
pissed them off, and then there goes their jobs upstate. So now they got to go into farming and other stuff or whatever they're going to do up there.
they showed a video of a prison that didn't have any people in it. That was, I hope it's closed by now, but it was fully staffed, and there were no people to be.
To the credit of this governor, again, he's closed a lot of our upstate prisons. There are no bodies in there. There's no people in it. I mean, it has shrunk to some extent. The census has decreased somewhat. I don't know how many they have now, but
Well, I guess my only concern about that question, yes, he has closed prisons, and if you save taxpayers' dollars, but how are you reallocating those dollars, and where are they going to? You know, when you talk about the person who's coming out on parole supervision, who doesn't have housing, doesn't have a job, all these challenges they face, how come that money isn't being redirected from the closing of the prisons to make sure you get affordable housing for the individuals that have to go into shelter? Why isn't it, you can't find a place where you're asking the private employer to hire those who are formerly incarcerated with criminal justice records, but where is the leadership coming from government to hire these individuals?
Exactly.
You know, if you want to have leadership, it should be coming from the government saying, look, I'll hire Grant Valentine. I know he has a felony. We're going to hire him based on this to be a certain job. Now, the private sector said, well, if you're willing to do it, then I can do it. But if the government's not willing to do it, then why are you asking or twisting arm of the private sector to do this? You know, so where's those fundings being redirected to? You know, are they being redirected to reducing the mortgage payments? Are they redirected to reduce rent payments? Or you close the prison to really work on a population that really needs this? And that would be my question.
And I think, again, it goes back to the prison itself. They need to bring more education, more job readiness programs in there, added to their 1, 2, 3-step program that they already have, which
But the
I don't know
women
what that
up
is,
here,
but-
I met with some women up at Bedford Hills who have their degrees, because they were saying, I have an associate's degree in paralegal, and I have a bachelor's degree in criminology, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, I have a bachelor's degree in business. So I said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Because because when you get out of here, if you're speaking to me, I always felt that you're in the infancy of employment anyway, because that's what I do. I do employment. So what do you want to be? And they were not holding on to the fact that they had degrees. They well, I'm going to do some clerical stuff, and I'm looking at them like, huh? Stop. You're kidding me. Because I don't have any experience, and I'm saying, no, you have a degree. Did you start thinking about what it is that you want to use that degree toward? Well, eventually I want to go to law school, but I'm going to have to crawl before I walk, and I'm saying, you have a degree. You don't have to slither. Think about what it is that nobody has aspirations to be anything, and these women still had a lot of time left. Like, well, not a lot of time, though, because 6 years, it's a lot of time to the 27-year-old that I met, because she had been in there for 5 years already, and that broke my heart. But 6 years, she says, well, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 years. They can't think past tomorrow. There's no, if you're incarcerated, there should be discharge planning from the day they walk in the door. Really, a program in place so that they can see how societal changes are made, and to aspire towards something. Because I had them talking about, okay, you need to go into business for yourself then.
well, that's where the community supervision piece comes in.
Well, and Danny, I've talked about this. You talk about people who care. You have people in the facility who care about that, then they would do that kind of thing. And it happens in isolated situations, but not as a practice. It
No,
doesn't.
not as a practice,
It,
no.
it doesn't. And certainly when you think of the individual, the woman or male who's looking, they've grown up in a mindset that I only live for today. I can't see past today because I don't. Based on my history, what I've seen in my communities, whether it be East Harlem, Bedford-Stuy, Rochester, tomorrow's not promised to me. It's what I do today. This is who I am today. You know, and that's the mindset.
And that's how
they
they're
have.
living. Only
That's
for today.
that's how
There
they
is
live.
no
So how
tomorrow.
do we change that?
Well, I think we have to be able to first connect them with people who say, like you said, there's a future for you. This is what you have to strive for. You know, we have to be able to have a community supervision that actually prepares them while they're incarcerated for competing in the open market. You can't go to corrections and learn stuff like sewing, small arms repair, small appliance repair, tailoring.
They got to catch up with today's technology.
We're talking about trades in the 16th century that corrections is still
industrial age.
Still having these folks do. And when you talk about refrigeration or computer, there's no certification that allows these folks to come out and compete in the open market for jobs. So so why would I take a training that's not going to prepare me for the real world once I get released? It's not preparing me for anything. It's just sort of window dressing to say I'm involved with something, but it doesn't help me. You know, why can't you have businesses come in to actually train and certify people while they're incarcerated and then come out and compete? Why can't you use technology? You don't have to have someone upstate do the training. You can use video conferencing you've been a part of to train people in classrooms for all kinds of different trades, even education. Why are we still having our correction system in the 16th century? You know, at some point we got to begin to move our system forward if we really care. And that's the question that I asked Danny: do we really care?
Well, they just started to move the parole board. The parole commissioners are now doing conference boards. They don't go there. There may be one left.
But even the parole board.
But look, my point is though. But my point is that look how slow they're going with technology here. They're still in the back in the century. That now you don't have to be there anymore.
But who's on the parole board? What's the makeup, the profile of the parole board?
Mostly cops and ex-district attorneys and
So
you maybe got two social workers on the board, an ex-nun is on the board.
So where is the sensitivity to the community?
And mostly Caucasian. Now let's talk about diversity here.
So how do they
get started?
How do you get appointed to the parole
I'll let Danny
board?
answer that question.
What's so special about these people?
Danny knows this very well.
Well, the way they do it now is it's all politics, unfortunately. I mean, it's I don't know how the second floor picks them, and how they go through their resumes, but it's mostly politics. The board is you have maybe one or two or three. Maybe they were looking for an Hispanic at the time on the Pataki. They were looking for an Hispanic. They grabbed Christine Hernandez. She was at the right place at the right time, but she's the only MSW on the board. I mean, social worker on the board, and and she's the only Latina on the board. You have the black gentleman who just retired.
The chairwoman is black,
and Tina, who by the way I love Tina to death. She's a new chairwoman. She's a lot more progressive than most of them, and we'll see. She's just been there for a little while, but I think it sounds promising with Tina Stanford.
So once you're on the board, it's like the Supreme Court.
No, it's a 6-year term.
Oh, okay.
You serve at the pleasure of the governor, and the reason why they did it from the way it is, so they give the next governor, if it doesn't, a chance to whether he wants to keep him or not.
Yeah, I think the question becomes on the parole board is how culturally competent, how culturally they are to the communities that are primarily Latino and African Americans who are coming to the parole board, to prosecutors and law enforcement people whose jobs usually is to incarcerate these individuals.
Yeah,
how
it's kind of one-sided.
how congruent can that be? I mean, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. If you're looking at a group that's coming from Bedford-Stuyvesant or South Bronx, those communities that have an environment that's totally different, that's really hostile in many cases, a school system that doesn't really service you as a child, you've made a mistake. Yes, you've made a mistake. You've paid your mistake. You're coming to a parole board with prosecutors and sheriffs. What do you think your response is going to be to those guys? They're going to look at you in a very negative way, and so I don't know how those decisions are made and why they make the decisions they do, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
I think they need to put an ex-offender on that board. That's what I think they need to do. They need to be a little more progressive. There are some states that do that.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
You look at the parole board in South Carolina, and I showed that to you. These are folks who worked at Walmart. These are folks who ordinary people, you know, who've been from those communities. That's who's on the parole board in South Carolina.
Because they're coming back into their communities.
Exactly right. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
You know, and they understand what the dynamics are. The person who went into prison, what they did, and if they really didn't rehabilitate, should they get parole? It makes a lot of sense. New York State, I think, as Danny says, it's more political. You know, it's about, you know, the district attorney who didn't get reelected, or the sheriff who didn't get reelected, or
some commissioner from an agency or deputy commissioner needs 3 more or 4 more years, you know.
So they don't apply, they're just appointed.
Well,
No, they all apply. They all want to be on the parole board because, you know, it's not a bad gig, you know. But at the end of the day, I think they can go out and do a little more when it comes to diversity and people with different backgrounds other than just law enforcement, you know. And then they don't do it, you know. Not yet. We're hoping. There's always hope up there in Albany.
Well,
Everything is an obstacle.
Well,
every time.
I think, though,
The only time there's room for possible change is during an election year, because these people want to be reelected, and some want to do it with large numbers because they have other political aspirations. But at the end of the day, you know, business as usual when they're reelected.
I think the ultimate measure of who we are is where we stand in moments of controversy and moments of crisis, you know, and how we come together collectively to say, this is not right, it's time to do something different, you know. And I think your show, like other shows like this, educating the public about what's taking place, really educating the public, because unfortunately, and I've talked to Danny about this a number of times, as long as you keep the public ignorant, as long as you keep the public ill-informed,
Yeah.
as long as you keep them miseducated, it'll be business as usual. You know, and there used to be civics done in the schools. They teach you how legislators work, how laws are passed. They don't do that anymore.
They don't.
So our young people.
And what it's turned out to be is our people that are the policymakers. You know, we elect these legislators to be legislators, not our leaders. You know, legislators. But for some reason or another, they become the de facto leaders of our community, or they've been, you know, the government in Albany and Washington. Yeah, let's talk to this senator. He knows exactly what the problem is, you know. Now, that's not necessarily true. You know, you need to talk to grassroots people that are out there every day living this. Because every politician has their own agenda. Every single one of them. And sometimes it's not the people they serve.
You know, there's always the question that's raised about why there's so much apathy in communities of color in terms of when it comes to voting. Why don't we come out and vote? And it's because folks say nothing's going to change.
Same old stuff on a different day.
It's going to be the same thing happening again.
Now,
So,
not to say though, you still got some, even though they're politicians, they're your elected officials, but you got to, like right up here in the Fordham area, in this area, Senator Gustavo Rivera. He's one of those firebrand senators that really get out there. I mean, you see him at different situations. I mean, boots on the ground guy. But then you got others that only show up every so often.
Photo op.
You got Robert Rodriguez in East Harlem, great guy. You know, he's in the middle of everything. He shows up to everything. And that's what you want to see in your political people that you send over. So they understand what your situation is, because you're the people that are going through it every single day. What happened with those NYCHA people when they did this whole mayoral thing and they all spent the night and did nothing with it?
Because they spent the night.
I know. They should have spent a week or two.
Live there.
Lived there for
I was
2
like,
weeks.
I said, that was a joke. That was a joke.
It turned out to be nothing, because I talked to these C-COP people, and they're still going through it every day. As a matter of fact, in the de Blasio administration, what they didn't do is all this about NYCHA this and NYCHA that, the residents. When he put his transiency, there was not one ICOP person in there. Those are the Tenants Association people. Not one. And they're still going through it.
And then they're always going to go through it. That's why I ran for mayor, because I wanted to really make a change, make a difference, and we are the grassroots people.
Right.
and Danny's right. There are some elected officials who are trying.
Few.
They're trying.
So few.
But for a lot of them, and I'm not saying no names, the only concern is in 2 years for re-election.
Right.
you know, and you'll see me then, you know, or I'm not going to do anything to upset the apple cart, you know, but in 2 years, I'll come to all your churches, you know, I'll come to all your barbecues, all your playground stuff, I'll be there,
And
okay?
we,
you know,
we have to make that change. That's the solution is, and letter writing, no. But
it's only two things politicians, and I call them politicians because you have
Such a derogatory title,
you
though,
have
politicians.
statesmen
there
are
we
the
go.
people who come out and really talk to what the people are saying. And there's very few statesmen around. You have the politicians who want to know what's in it for me before I do anything for you.
Right.
You know what's in it for me. You know, and
What's the biggest bang I can get for my buck here when it comes to re-election time?
right. You know,
How many fundraisers is it going to help me with?
But there are some statesmen, some people, elected officials who are quality people.
They were quality people.
I can tell you, Ruth Hazel Thompson, quality person.
Quality person.
Exactly.
You know, quality.
Ruth
I
Hazel
can
Thompson.
tell you,
Quality.
Andrew Stewart Cousins, quality person. You know, I can tell you, Valentine Montgomery, quality person. These are people who will fight for you. Gustavo, I mean, these are people who are
Melissa, the new speaker. Melissa, she's a go-getter. I mean, she may have the greatest personality, but you know something? She does her job. She does her job.
Yeah,
And people should be happy with that.
Andy King here in the Bronx too. Another quality, known for a long time. Another quality person. So there's some
Maria DeRoyo. She's right in the middle of that Hope of SCHOLAS thing. Right in the middle. She's there every time.
So there's some quality people out here, but unfortunately, the general public, they group them all in the same bag, you know, and they say, what difference is it going to make?
And you know who else at the federal level? Your Senator Gillibrand. She shows up at all this community stuff. If she can't be there, her people are definitely there. You got a girl named Arelis Hernandez, great person. She shows up to everything, representing the senator,
Yes.
and gets in the middle of it.
Yeah, Susan up in Rockland too. Susan's up there
she's
too.
all
yeah.
over the place.
Gillibrand's a quality. I mean, these are quality.
These are quality
they're
people,
quality
but they're very
people.
small and short and
Very
very not too many.
And
we need more.
their focus is not on being reelected. Their focus is how can I service the people who put me in office.
okay, are we gonna have to go to round 2 with this?
No,
Are we gonna have to go to round 2 with this?
Sure.
no, not now. I can't do it now.
Okay. Well,
Can we do it another day?
we can do it another day.
Good.
Okay.
I'm enjoying this. I was
We're-
just getting
we've hit another milestone here, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I want to say again, this is Hilda K. Broady, and I want to thank you for choosing In My Shoes. And as you see, this is not a sound bite. We are going in depth, and we're going to look at every aspect because we need to make a difference. We need to take that a different approach to servicing the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you.